Hi everybody, welcome to another weekly session. Today's session we'll be talking about different topics like activation functions and data science project management or deep learning project management. We might pick up the topic of self-contrastive learning, so those kind of things. But that topic is quite vast in itself, so I might include it in the discussion. I might exclude it and make it a separate video because there's no point of touching it on a superficial level. If I want to touch it, I will get into the into the till the most possible depths, to the extreme depths, so that we have a good understanding of what we are about to discuss and what we have actually discussed. So that makes sense rather than having a superficial touch and overview of what we are talking. So the first topic of discussion is activation functions. What activation functions are, I think you already know, but let's have a quick overview of what all activation functions are. And I think I found this article quite interesting given the fact that it briefly describes and summarizes all the activation functions, and you get all of them at a single place, nothing better than that. And activation functions, I think they are quite what do you say, ingrained. If you are into data science, they are the essence. Activation function is the essence of data science, and if you are not into, if you don't understand the activation functions, it would be difficult for you. If you are not, and if you don't understand which activation function to use at what point of time, it might be difficult for you. If you're looking for making something as what I say is custom activation functions or custom models, if you want to make custom models, custom those kind of thing, activation functions are always needed. And which activation functions to use? I mean, activation functions is the soul and the heart of deep learning models. I mean, that is what made neural networks a different thing than the linear functions, right? So that's the very first point. What is an activation function? Activation function, I think you are able to see my screen. Activation function has two different objectives. First objective of activation function is to add non-linearity. Second objective is to squish the values from a certain range rather than having huge values. So this is what we are about to see. First is non-linearity, and second is to activate, third is to trigger the values. So if you want to trigger values, if you want to add a functionality wherein few or certain neurons would be triggered upon hitting up the values, let's say a particular value is hit for a neuron and you want to activate that particular neurons, and based on that neuron certain that's a beam kind of thing which happens. Like this particular neuron gets activated, the other several sets of neurons get activated. This particular neuron gets activated, so several other neurons get activated. So that's a beam kind of thing, but that's not on concern. What is activation function? So this is your neural network. What would be H1? It would be W1 into X1 plus W1 into X1 plus X2 into W3, W2, X1 into W1, X2 into W3 plus B1. This is the H1. So this is basically linear multiplication addition. Till now, H1 has everything which is linear. If you want to add non-linearity, why do we need to add non-linearity? The idea of neural networks is to differentiate it from linear functions. So why do we need to have linear functions? So why do we need to have non-linear functions? The reason we need to have non-linear functions is if it's better, right? What if we don't have non-linear functions? What if I don't add activation function? What would it be? What would it be? It would be some bunch of multiple linear functions concatenated together. That's not what we are looking for. That's not at all what we are looking for. We are looking for something that is a bit different in nature, that has multiple features. First feature is to have a trigger so that value reaches this particular value, then trigger this neuron or trigger that neuron. Second, add non-linearity. Third is to squish the values in a particular range. So that was the initial idea of activation function. Good enough. So let's have a brief overview of what all activation functions we have. We have sigmoid, we have tanh, we have ReLU, leaky ReLU, parametric ReLU, LU, swish, mesh, softmax. Well, the most famous are sigmoid, softmax, ReLU, and tanh. These are the most famous activation functions which are popularly used. Leaky ReLU is also popular. Parametric ReLU, LU, and swish, mesh, these are least discussed, but we might pick them up in today's discussion. So what is sigmoid? What is sigmoid is, this is the So what all you need to learn? So if you are in an interview, what you need to learn is the activation function, the derivative of the activation function, the properties of the activation function. That's it. And where this activation function would be a bad choice, where would you use this activation function in model building? These are the things which you need to remember for your any examination or those kind of things. If you're watching this video for examination point of view, if you're watching this from a learning point of view, well and good. So this is what the graph looks like. This is the blue one is 0 to 1 S-shaped curve for sigmoid. The derivative is something like this. Advantages, derivable at every point between 0 to 1. Clear predictions, not zero centered. This is a question which is asked very often. Disadvantages, huge disadvantages, vanishing gradient, and derivative is very low. Takes longer to converge, not zero centered. That's why it would take longer to converge. Saturates and kills the gradients, computationally expensive. So where do you use exactly where do you use a binary or sigmoid activation? Sigmoid activation is particularly used for binary classification, that too in the final node. So where you have a classification, dense last layer of the neural network is usually sigmoid. That's it. Let's move on to tan h. Tan h is this. Learn the derivative. Derivative is nothing but 1 minus tan h whole square. Tan h, I mean 1 minus tan h term square of the tan h term. This is what this looks like, the curves. Advantages, zero centered, and disadvantages, vanishing gradient still prevails, similar to sigmoid, computationally expensive, gradient saturate. It is sometimes used in hidden layers, sometimes. So where would you use exactly this? We'll get on to this later. Where would, let's search, where would tan h be beneficial? I think in the ReLU papers or in the patch normalization, those kind of things, or FNet, few architectures implement tan h. I don't remember which architectures use tan h activation. We'll get on this. Let it be. Let's not waste time. Let's move on to ReLU. ReLU is quite simple. Max of 0 and 1. So it's not derivable. This point is not derivable, so it's not differentiable. It's not differentiable at this point, although it is shown like this. So this is not differentiable. This point is not differentiable, computationally expensive, non-linearity, vanishing gradients. It does not suffer from vanishing gradient, unbounded, sparsity, those kind of things. One point is if you need the negative gradients, it would be nullifying them to 0. So that's a bad point. That's a huge disadvantage. If these are the negative values, it would nullify to 0 because it is max of 0 and x. So x is minus 2. So it would be max of 0 and minus 2. So 0. So any negative value you have, it would be squished to 0. So if that's the case, using ReLU would be quite disadvantageous, as you would be losing a hell lot of information. What is the fix for this is leaky ReLU. And where do you use ReLU? Definitely, we use it a lot in the hidden layers. Now, what is leaky ReLU? Leaky ReLU tries to overcome the point of dying ReLU and those kind of things. And then we have disadvantages, parameters, hyperparameters, quite simple. Then we have parametric ReLU. Rather than 0 and x, we have different parameters, and it is a bit of customizing your function. Then we have LU. This one is quite interesting. Fix the problem of ReLU to some extent, and it also does. The equation of parametric ReLU is this. Alpha is the parameter, lies between 0 to this. So this is what LU is like. Advantages is it is derivable at zero and it bends smoothly at zero, and this is negative, produce negatives outputs, pushes mean value towards zero, noise robust activation, risk of overfitting is reduced, computationally expensive, alpha is a parameter used in hidden layers. So these are kind of new. Swish activation function recently introduced back in 2017. This is the equation of this. Advantages: unbounded above, unbounded below, non-monotonic, self-gated, smooth activation, computationally expensive. Alternative to ReLU, authors recorded an increment of 0.9 on 0.6 in top 1 classification of mobile NASNet and Inception ResNet 2. Then we have mesh. Equation of mesh is this, is a softmax this. Quite similar, extremely similar, disadvantage, computationally expensive, hidden layer. Softmax, I think each one of us knows what softmax is. Extremely used for multi-class classification. I think all you need to learn is the equation and derivative of softmax. Derivative of, I don't think derivative of softmax is there. Derivative of softmax. Let's see. I think you will have partial derivatives. I don't think you can get proper derivatives of this. No. Handle multiple classes, probability distribution, those kind of things. And these are the different experiments performed with all the activation functions we discussed. I think it briefly summarizes what we are talking about and does give a brief overview. I think activation functions, what is important to learn about activation functions, the different activation functions you have, their equation, their derivatives, when to use, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages, and those are learned by understanding the graph of the activation functions. So if you understand the graph of an activation functions, the equations, I think it would not be difficult for like some of the factors, like whether or not it is derivative. Is it zero centered? Is sigmoid zero centered? No. Because why? You remember the equation, and above, although using the equation is difficult, humanly difficult, or it's humanly not possible to plot the graph instantaneously. So especially if you are going through a test. So what you need to do is remember the graph, what the graph is like this, not zero centered. Vanishing gradients. Why vanishing gradients? Look at this. For points like in this region, there would be extremely zero or negligible vanishing update. So what is the juicy portion? Juicy portion is this part. From here to here, this is the part wherein you will have good upgrades, good gradients, but from something like where the region goes flat, you won't be having good gradients. So that is the reason you will have vanishing gradients. So this is the reason that you have vanishing gradients. Small updates, extremely small updates. And as it progresses, the updates get lost and lost and lost as it progresses through the different layers. Proceeding to different things like tanish, go through the equation, go through the graph. Is it zero centered? Yes. Is it derivable? Yes. Does it saturate? Yes, it does saturate because of the nature. When it comes to ReLU, does it saturate? No. No vanishing gradient. That's why it is used in hidden layers. So I think it's quite intuitive in nature. Please read through it. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit me up. I would be more than happy to help you out on this. And yeah, let's move on to the next topic. And ensure that you do hit the subscribe button down there. Alright.
Hi, hi. So let's move on to the next topic, which is how to organize your deep learning projects and the kind of listing of the best practices. We might not be able to cover the third topic of the day, which was contrastive learning, and hopefully we will pick it up in the next session. Although next session is also quite vast in itself, we would be implementing the various optimizing functions, so I don't see any scope for time there, but let's see, we might extend up or a separate video for self-contrastive learning. The topic is quite interesting. I could have covered it on a superficial view, but that was not what I wanted to do, so let it be. Let's pick it up in the upcoming sessions. That would be it. So let us get done. What is how to organize the deep learning projects? What are the best practices and how can you do it? Why is this topic important? I think this is something you would be actually needing in your projects or anything. This is extremely relevant, purely relevant to what you do, what you don't do. This is how to understand basically any project you do, any deep learning project or any machine learning project you do, you need to have a structure, directory kind of thing. So doing a project for one time or doing it for a hobby or those kind of things is one thing, is one aspect, but making it scalable, reproducible, uh, shareable, those kind of things is another thing. So for that you need to follow the proper industry-wide approaches or techniques which are popularly followed, and that should be the ideal agenda of the discussion in the next 10-20 minutes. So here we begin. So this is any project life cycle. You're given a task. Let's say you're given a task to identify degradable waste and non-degradable waste, biodegradable and non-biodegradable. So what is this? So how you go by it? So you first define the task. So you would be given a sample image. Would it be a image? Would it be a video? How would it be? Where would it be used? When? What is the device on which it would be used? So that is defining the task. So once you define the task, okay, it would be used on mobile phones for household garbage. There are two different kinds of garbage: household garbage, commercial garbage, industrial garbage, animal garbage. So what kind of garbage are you dealing with? Or anything relevant. So your task defining should be extremely well and good. If you're not good at it, please be better at it. Make yourself good at it, because that's the starting point. And if you don't have a good starting point, I think that's the most blunderous thing that can ever happen to anybody or any team, data science team. So make sure that you have a good task defining. So once you have a good task defining, proceed to collect data in accordance with the task, because task is something that is you're working on, and you're expected to deliver and meet the expectations demanded by the task and deliver to your client. So ensure that client might be not so well versed with the technological terms. So what you need to ensure, you need to ensure that you are well versed with the understanding of what the client actually wants. So ideally is something like you should be asking out the client a lot and clarifying the things and ensure that yes, you have properly understood what the client wants, and once you understand what the client wants, you can proceed with your iteration. And even if, don't ever hesitate to approach your client again in between your process or anything in between your iteration to clarify the things, because ultimately it's a client who's going to use your product, not you. So once you have clear understanding of what the client is demanding, then you should proceed forward. Defining the task. So here we define the task. When you start a project, you clearly define the project objective of the task. So what are the evaluation criteria, optimization functions? I think this is a bit technical, but I gave you a bit more elaborate and more specific overview. This is talking about the technicalities like the evaluation criteria, optimization function. So any client would not be defining the evaluation criteria or optimization function. He or she would be asking that this is my task, I want it to be get done. So this is something you would be defining on your own end, right? So even if your task is view, it would like you need to define evaluation criteria. You need to understand what would be the optimization function, loss function, those kind of things. So I think this point is quite interesting. Is the project even possible? I think this is how you should every time start. So let's say garbage collection. You're trying to understand the garbage segregation or better processing of the garbage segregation. How can you deal with it? Is the project even possible? So there are multiple factors. Is the data set available? It would be a yes or no question. If yes, well and good. Is the data set available? Is it relevant to the kind of data, images, samples, data, or the samples which the client would be dealing with? Right? So if yes, then well and good. If no, then it's problematic. So it would be is an added bottleneck, is an added time constraint which gets into the entire pipeline. Do you have good previous work on this domain? If yes, then you have a good starting or baseline. If no, then you need to start from scratch. Do you have a good computing power? if the data or anything what you're about to start with, do you have anything which supports the competition? Yes, no. So these are kind of decisions you need to understand. You need to have a is these should be the things you should understand at the very starting, and once you understand at the starting, then you should drift your boat in a direction which would be most feasible for you and your project. So for the success of your project, for the success of your project, structure your project accordingly. I think this is quite important. Please go through this. This is particularly, I would ask you to go through this. This is something you would like to have. So let's say you're maintaining something either on the Google Drive or on your local drive. No matter what or no matter where it is, you need to have this kind of structure: data folder, docs, models, notebooks, references, reports, requirements, setup, source. How does it help? It helps in better maintenance, versioning, those kind of things. Even within data, you can have multiple versions: version 1, version 2, version 3. Data versioning is extremely important. So you often change data, and let's say you changed from version 1 to version 2. There was an improvement in the data, in the model performance. You did not change anything with the model. You're keeping all the model architecture and the model parameters fixed. You're keeping the model architecture and the parameters fixed. Nothing changed, but you're changing the data. Now you change the data from version 1 to version 2, wherein there was a significant difference, and you observed a significant improvement in the performance. So you would keep the version 2. Now, after a month, you changed the version 2 and tried to change it to version 3. Again, kept all the parameters with the model, dealing with the model same. But this time, there was a depreciation in the performance, and this is where you would say that no, I need to revert back to version 2. That's the utility of data versioning. You should have a good data versioning system. So is the case with documentation. You should have a good documentation. So should be the case with the modeling. Everything good enough. Discuss generated model trade-offs. So this is something we often deal with. I think this is something you would be understanding better if I talk about the models like MobileNet. MobileNet are usually low accuracy and models with a high speed, although they are achieving somewhere around 83, 85, 70s, 80, 70, something like that, 70 something, 70, 80s, something like that, but with a very super high speed. So that is something which we call as MobileNet, the speed versus accuracy trade-off. This is usually relevant when you're dealing with mobile devices. If not, if it is server-side device, then you need to understand the performance. Where is performance? Is performance extremely valuable? Yes, if it is a medical scenario, then you need to be 100% accurate. Speed can be compromised. Now, if you want to improve speed, it would not be possible for a single model, but you can do a hack around it. So what you do is we deploy the models over Docker and pass it on the Kubernetes cluster. So multiple models there. So even if the request is high enough, it doesn't matter. Those are diverted across the multiple clusters, and the performance is unaffected. So these days, I think accuracy is the prime factor which is focused upon, and the speed is somehow or somewhat uh, is somehow or somewhat worked upon by the utilization of smart techniques. So that is what we are talking about. Then comes the data collection. Data collection I already discussed. Either you have your own data, if not, you're using open source data. If not, else you need to create your own data. I've created my data. It has been extremely troublesome and time consuming, but once done, this is the best data you can have, because open source data might not be best fitting to your use case, but using your own data, own generated data is something which fits the best, which is best for your utility or something like that. Defining ground truth is model labeling. It's kind of labeling. So one is like human labeling. So there's a difference in the human labeling as well. So let's say errors in human labeling and those kind of things. So this is what it is. Not so important, but should be done with 100% precision and accuracy. Now, what is validity and validating the quality of data? It is extremely important. Why? even if you have good data, does it match the pixels or the quality you need for a model training? It doesn't match the type of data. Another factor which I have not mentioned, which is not mentioned over here, which is widely mentioned in the Andrew Ng's lectures, Professor Andrew Ng's lectures, are the data distribution come from do the data come from the same distribution? If not, then you need to rethink about your data. Does the training data come from the same distribution as of the testing data? So is the case with the validation data. If not, you need to rethink about your data. Why? Because even if you have, let's say you have trained a model and it worked extremely well on the training data but performed poorly on the testing data, what would be the inferences? If you trained a model, very fundamental question, please listen very carefully. If you trained a model, it worked very well on the training data, but it failed on the testing data, what could be the inferences? First, either the model is overfitting or the training data, there's no problem with the data. The training data is from one distribution and the testing data is from another distribution. Now, what do I mean with the distributions? So training data is like, let's say you're doing garbage collection. So training data is has a distribution wherein the garbage boxes are of one type, of one texture, whereas where the testing data is the real world sample, is a real world where the garbage boxes are quite dirty, are shabby, are not recognizable. So those kind of things, wherein the training data is the utopian ideal garbage boxes, where the testing data is not as good as what we are expecting. So that's what you need to actually worry about. Now, once you're done, this is build the data ingestion pipeline. This is quite widely dealt in TensorFlow and everywhere, because why should you deal with the ingestion pipeline again and again from the very scratch? So it doesn't make any sense. So what we do is TF data pipeline. You define this would be the ETL, extraction, transformation, and whatever loading. Extraction, transformation, loading, those kind of steps need to be followed, and that's how you do with the data ingestion pipeline. Why is it important? It is important so as to maintain, again, to speed up your process. So if you're dealing if you're dealing with a data set for one time, it's fine, but if you need to deal with a data set for multiple times, it doesn't make any sense to start it from the very scratch. Your coding hours are way more costly compared to the computational hours. At this time, I'm talking about 2021, 31st October. At this day, this time, your coding hours are way more costly than your computation hour. Why? Computation has gone extremely faster and cheaper. So people are coding in Python and high-level languages. The reason being, coding time is costly compared to the computation time. So just make sure you have a good pipeline so that it is reproducible, fast enough, easily understandable. You can debug it at your comfort. The multiple advantages of using pipeline. Once it is a one-time investment, setting up a pipeline is quite difficult and troublesome. That I agree. Definitely, it cannot be neglected. It cannot be denied. But once it is done, it fetches a hell lot of advantages to reap upon. Then we have model training and exploration. It is definitely kind of mundane, and there's no point of discussing this particular point. Then this is important, establishing baseline for model performance. There are two kind of baseline. One is machine learning model baseline, and another is human level baseline. So even human have limitations. Like if you give a data set to a humans, there would be some percentage error at humans. So that is something we should not, at the beginning, we should not exceed to jump across that human expectation. AI is capable of jumping the human expectation, but when you're doing a modeling, so first your target should be exceeding the simple baseline model. Let's say you're a simple image classifier. Are you able to exceed that? That's good. So that is your simple machine learning or deep learning model baselines. Once you exceed that, you keep on improving till you are able to reach human level. And once you achieve human level, I think that's way good. Your model is ready to be deployed. Even if it's not able to achieve human level, it's pretty close to, or it's not able to achieve human level baseline, but it's quite close to human level baseline. It's pretty good. You can send the model for deployment. You can perform many things for inference, those kind of things, whatever you want to do. So that's the point. So those come in the error, bias, those variance things. So start with a simple model on the initial pipeline, overfit or simple. I think this point has never been discussed about. I also found it quite interesting. What is overfit a simple model to the training data? So underfitting is one thing, but overfitting can exactly be is easier to reduce overfitting compared to underfitting. Underfitting is like your model architecture is too simple, or there might be multiple points. Their data is not good, or multiple points. But when there's overfitting, you can reduce the complexity of the model or those kind of things. So neither is good, but this is one aspect. I've never gone through this, so this is something new to me as well. So yeah, good enough. So it's like reverse engineering. You're doing the overfitting of the model, then you go back. Then it talks about finding state of the art architectures for your model, then trying to keep track of your model configuration and experiment metadata. This is what Neptune.ai provides, or weights and biases, or MLflow, those kind of things provide. Model refinement, this is hyperparameter tuning, controlling the model to avoid overfitting, regularization, these kind of things you already know. Organize models and track of the training runs. Testing and evaluation should be good. Ensure that the testing data is in match with what your client is expecting to be tested on, your model to be tested on. Then model deployment is one thing. Then after it is deployed, there are different changes which happen. One is data drift. So after a span of 5-7 years, that let's say government changed the kind of public garbage boxes, pattern of the public garbage boxes, or whatever the design is. If let's say there's an engineering improvement and there's a design which changed the fundamental design of the garbage boxes, so that is data drift, and you need to keep a constant check on the model. So it's not one-time job. You need to keep a constant monitor over. Once the model is deployed, for after first deployment, it shifts from ML to ML ops, from modeling to modeling and maintenance of the model. So that is what it is. This concludes the discussion. I think it was good enough. This is actually, I think the key takeaway should be what I discussed in the beginning. The directory organization should be good, and all the points which were not mentioned in the talk, but I did talk about them from my own personal experience. And I think it was quite beneficial for you. If it was, please ensure you do hit the subscribe button. Alright, take care. Bye bye.